What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the franchise here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. In today's episode, I'm going to be giving out my NFC East prediction. We are 29 days away from week one, game one of the NFL season. So from now until then, it's prediction, it's preview, it's all of that. And we're going to start going through each of the divisions in the NFL. Today, starting with the NFC East, I'm going to give a preview of each team, where I think they're going to finish in terms of a record for this season. Also, today, I'm going to talk about some of these teams post MLB trade deadline, the performances of some of the teams that made tons of moves, teams that have been hot since the deadline, and then the college realignment with tons of conference realignment going on in college sports, seemingly because of college football, but this has an impact on every single collegiate sport, not just college football. Before we get into the episode, though, as always, like I mentioned, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, so we can watch or listen to the franchise. You can also follow the Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok in the description of the episode. So let's start here with the MLB post-trade deadline. I think we did a trade deadline live stream last Tuesday, and we're a week removed from the deadline. And man, some of these teams that made a lot of moves or were good in the first half of the season have really crumbled. And the first one's obviously the Angels, right? This was a team that going into the trade deadline on August 1st were above 500. We're, I think, 3.5 games out of the wild card spot. We're playing some great baseball, and now they lost 6 straight games at one point. They're now 3-7 in their last 10. They finally won a game last night against the Giants, but they're 57-58. They're a game under 500. They're 11.5 games back of the division, and they're now 7 games back of the wild card. So a team that bought in, got Lucas Giolito, got Ronaldo Lopez, got Randall Grichuk and CJ Crone, that traded their very thin farm system assets for these impact players, has been horrible since the deadline. And the pitching is at fault, the starting pitching, the bullpen, but it's also the offense. The Angels, with runners in scoring position since the All-Star break, have been horrible. They've not been converting when there's runners on base in scoring position. The team they just can't hit. Outside of Shohei Ohtani, this Angels team is not a productive offensive team. And now they sit 7 games back of the final wildcard spot in the second week of August. And things are just not looking good for this team. And like I mentioned before, with the schedule they have going forward, they play Houston and the Rangers over the next 2 series, followed by Tampa, Cincinnati, the Mets, and the Phillies to end out the month of August. Things are not looking positive for this team in terms of making the postseason. And I mean, that is easily the biggest disappointment post-trade deadline of a team that went all in, and it has completely backfired for them. And another team, now they might not have gone as all in as the Angels, but the Arizona Diamondbacks are a team that started out the season super, super hot. I believe they were, 12 or 16 games, something like that, over 500 at one point this season. They were leading the National League West at one point. Now they sit in third place, 10 games back of first place. They're 500 even, 57-57. And they are 2 games out of a wild card spot when they at one point possessed a division title. The teams in front of them, Miami, Cincinnati, Chicago, Phillies, and the San Francisco Giants. I mean, are the Diamondbacks realistically better than any of those teams? It's really unsure. I don't think they're better than the Phillies. The Phillies are a great team in terms of pitching and the players they have on offense that are able to flip a switch at any given moment. The pitching is a big one for the Phillies with Wheeler, Nola, adding Lorenzen, Ranger Suarez, this is Taijuan Walker. This is a very polished rotation for the Phillies. The Marlins, who knows? I mean, this is a very confusing Marlins team. Obviously, they got Luis Arias, Jazz Chisholm coming back from injury, although you never know with Jazz Chisholm. He could end up on the IL tomorrow. Miami is an interesting team. I ultimately don't think they make the postseason. The Reds have played some pretty bad baseball since the deadline. The Cubs are one of the hottest teams in the game. And then the Giants are just seemingly finding ways to win games, and they're 10 games over 500. And you look at their roster, their offense, you wonder where the production's coming from, but this lineup is just able to hit. And not to mention, they have one of the best pitching rotations in the game, in my opinion. And look, the Padres are on the come up. The Cubs have been one of the hottest teams in the game. The Braves are still the Braves. The Twins are 5 games over right now. They have been playing great coming out of the break or coming out of the deadline. And then the Orioles and Rays as well. So some of these teams, the Angels in particular, a team that went all in, a team that made the most moves at the deadline, the team that could have traded Ohtani, decided not to, decided to go all in on this season, and it's completely backfired for them. And they seem to completely be missing out on the postseason this year. All right, before we get into the NFC East prediction, college football, in particular college football, I know it affects all of college sports. There's been a lot of conference shifting over the last week, but really this has been the last 2 years. I mean, 2 years ago, you saw Texas and Oklahoma leave the Big 12 for the SEC starting next season. They announced the move 2 years ago. And that was really the first big domino to fall in this conference realignment. You had the 2 top Big 12 schools, 2 prestige universities go to the SEC, the powerhouse of college football, and join the conference with Alabama, LSU, Auburn, Georgia. You're joining the conference with those schools. They were able to add 2 of the most prestigious brands in college football and in college sports in general, Texas and Oklahoma. And then obviously last year, you saw USC and UCLA leave the Pac-12, join the Big Ten starting next season as well. And that's really when the dominoes started to fall. I mean, the USC-UCLA move is when you knew, look, college football is going to look different in 5 years. College sports, these conferences as we know them, are going to change. And we all speculated, after USC and UCLA left, that look, the Big Ten is going to look to add more schools on the West Coast. And Oregon and Washington were picked out. Potentially, if Notre Dame didn't want to be independent, maybe they grab a Big 12 school. The Big Ten was looking to expand. The SEC, maybe they want to add Clemson, Florida State. Who knows what other universities they want to add, but it was going to happen sooner rather than later where you see it all blow up out of nowhere. And that's exactly what's happened over the last 2 weeks in college sports. It started with Colorado leaving the Pac-12, joining the Big 12 a few weeks ago. And then since then, Arizona State, and Utah have all left the Pac-12, joining the Big 12. And then you have Oregon and Washington leaving the Pac-12, going to the Big 10 to join USC and UCLA. And you leave the Pac-12, who last year had 12 schools. Next year was supposed to have 10 schools. You're going to leave them with 4 schools: Stanford, Cal, Washington State, and Oregon State. And it is just very interesting. It is very crazy to see these conferences that and the history that these conferences possess. I mean, the Pac-12, being might not always have been one of the best conferences in terms of college football. It might not always have the premier schools, but it has a lot of history. It has a lot of great schools. All of these schools at one point or another have been good programs in terms of just college football, respectively. And now it's gone. And these moves of these schools, in particular the Pac-12, and a little bit in Texas, Oklahoma. I mean, obviously their move goes with what I'm about to say. But all of these moves are not to benefit the competition that all of these other athletic programs are going to get, right? You'll hear the presidents of these universities say, well, we're joining the Big 10, we're joining the SEC, we're joining the Big 12, whatever conference they're joining. We're joining them because it gives our student athletes a better opportunity to play on a national stage against better competition and better student athletes. Quite frankly, that is just not the case. All right. All of these moves are about the sport of college football. None of these decisions have anything to do with college basketball, college baseball, college softball, track and field, any of the collegiate sports that a university has. It only is impacting, and these decisions are only being made based off of football and football revenue. And look, football is the most popular sport in the United States. So it makes sense to make moves, financial decisions based off of your most profitable sport, your most profitable thing you have to put out there on the national display, being college football. And college football being one of the biggest brands in the world. It's probably, outside of the NFL and the NBA, it's probably right up there with the MLB, NHL, in terms of right in between there, in terms of most popular leagues in America, right? So all of these decisions for these schools to go and join these new conferences, it does not affect, it's not for the other sports. And I think that is a problem, right? I mean, you're looking at these random, you know, you're looking at these other sports, track and field, volleyball, women's basketball, even men's basketball. You're looking at some of these programs at these universities. For example, Arizona, University of Arizona, they are now going to join, we'll use Oregon. They're now joining the Big Ten. Their college women's volleyball team, men's volleyball team, track and field team, on any given night now is going to have to fly all the way to Rutgers to compete in a game at some point during their tenure with the Big Ten. They're going from Oregon to New Jersey in the middle of the week, having to fly back the next morning. These decisions to leave these conferences should not be at the expense of these other programs. And this is why I think you've probably heard tons of people say this. College football needs to separate itself from the NCAA and these other conferences, because college football is not an amateur sport. It is a professional league. It is a feeder league to the NFL, where you have guys in college football who are premier talents. I mean, these guys in college football, some of them are better than current NFL players, and that's just simply facts. I mean, you see guys go in the first, in the second, and the third round of an NFL draft, and then their rookie season are already better than some of the guys currently in the NFL, right? So you have college players, college quarterbacks, college receivers, any position. You have guys that are better in an amateur sport like college football that are better than professionals in the NFL. And college football, with the TV deals, with all of the media rights deals, with all of the national attention that it gets, it is a professional sport. It really is. It is a pro sport. I mean, these guys are getting millions of dollars. The top players in college football are getting millions of dollars in NIL and endorsements. The university may not directly be paying them anymore, or so we say, or so they say. But these student athletes, are generating revenue based off of their name, their performance, and where they go to school. In other words, they are professional athletes. They just aren't getting a guaranteed salary from the school. They didn't sign a 4-year, $52 million deal with the University of Alabama to go play football. Or so we know. Maybe they are. So that's why college football needs to separate itself from the NCAA. They just do. You need to have all of the FBS schools in college football separate themselves, divide up into conferences. You can have the Power Five, and you can have the Group of Five, or you can figure out how you want to separate it. If I was to separate college football from the NCAA, and what I would do is I would set up 4 conferences. You have the SEC, you have the Big Ten, you have the Big 12, and then maybe the Pac-12, whatever you want to call them. You have 4 conferences in each kind of region of the country. because that's how these conferences are made. Regional conferences, you have those, the big four, and then below that you'd have the group of four. And what I would do is I'd make relegation, just like in European soccer and in other sports. The top two finishers of the group of four schools in each regional conference get bumped up, and the bottom four from the bottom two or whatever it is, from each conference get moved down. So you always have this filter of new teams every year, incentivizes schools are trying to win. They don't want to have bad programs. So that's not really a problem. And maybe I'm getting too lost into this little conversation about the relegation, but look, college football needs to separate itself from the rest of college athletics, because these decisions are not being thought about in terms of basketball, men's and women's, softball, baseball, track and field. It's not being thought about when it comes to those sports. It's solely based on college football. And look, this was bound to happen at some point. You're going to have more and more schools join these other conferences, the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12. Who knows what's going to happen to the ACC. But those conferences can still stay alive with the football side of each university being a separate entity and being its own league. College football can be its own league, not under the oversight of the NCAA, and in turn producing the best college football matchups, the best college football that we can get week in and week out, but not affecting the other sports, the other student athletes at these universities that aren't playing football. All right. NFC East predictions. 29 days away from the start of the NFL season. And from now until then, we're going to go division by division and give my predictions, record predictions, talk about these teams, what they did in the offseason, what they did last season. And today we're starting with the NFC East. And first team up is the Dallas Cowboys. Last season, 2022, they finished 12-5. They made the postseason, but they did lose to the San Francisco 49ers. What was it, in the divisional round? I can't remember the playoff bracket. Let's pull that up real quick. Where is it? Yeah, they lost. So they beat Tampa Bay in the first round of the playoffs in the wild card round. Then they lost to the 49ers in the divisional round. One of the biggest notes for this Cowboys team, former offensive coordinator Kellen Moore was fired by the team, by the Cowboys. He went to the Chargers. And now we're seeing head coach Mike McCarthy calling the offensive plays this season. I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to look for coming into this season for the Cowboys. You're having a new play caller. You're having Mike McCarthy call these offensive plays. What is it going to look like with the struggles of Dak Prescott last season in terms of securing the football, throwing the football away, his interceptions? What is this offense going to look like? First of all, the additions they made to this team, I think, are some pretty big impact additions. They added Stephon Gilmore to that cornerback room to pair with Trayvon Diggs in that secondary. They also added Brandon Cooks from the Texans, and I love that pickup. And we'll talk about that when we look at their depth chart. They added Chuma Edoga on the offensive line, Ronald Jones in the running back room, and Mozzie Smith was their first-round pick at the defensive tackle position. They did lose Dalton Schultz at tight end, Connor McGovern on the offensive line, Noah Brown, and Ezekiel Elliott is probably the biggest name not returning to this Cowboys team. Last season, this defense was one of the premier defenses in the NFL. They were fifth in least points allowed last season. They allowed 20.1 points per game. They were eighth in passing yards allowed. Their rushing defense wasn't as great, 22nd in rushing yards allowed per game. They did lead the NFL in takeaways with 33 and had a plus 10 turnover differential. They also had the third most sacks in the NFL as a defensive unit. On the offensive side, they were 4th in points scored per game at 27.5, 9th in rushing yards, 14th in passing yards. And they have the number 7 ranked O-line according to PFF. When we take a look at the depth chart here for the Dallas Cowboys, obviously Dak Prescott headlines. He's the starting quarterback of this team as long as he is healthy. But for me, I really want to take a look at this skill position group. Tony Pollard is officially the starting RB. I know last season he kind of got more reps than Ezekiel Elliott. That's kind of been the trend over the last few years, but he's officially the RB1 of this Dallas Cowboys team. And I think he's going to really, really thrive. I mean, we've seen it over the last few years. He's been one of the most impact running backs in the game. He's active in the passing game as well. And the receiving core is where I think the Cowboys have really improved the most. CeeDee Lamb, second year as the wide receiver 1 on this team. But the big pickup is Brandon Cooks. The struggle for the Cowboys last season, well, there was a few. First of all, it was Dak Prescott turning the ball over. He had 15 interceptions last season, which was a problem. But it was also the running back room. CeeDee Lamb was the only receiver on the team to have over 600 yards. He had 1,300 last season. No receiver had even close to 600. Adding Brandon Cooks, who's a proven wide receiver who is going to be able to impact this Cowboys offense. And he moves Michael Gallup down to the 3rd string wide receiver. Brandon Cooks and Michael Gallup now there with CeeDee Lamb. Look, this is going to be, I think this is going to be a great receiving core as long as Dak Prescott can take care of the football. If he doesn't turn the football over, he has a plethora of weapons on that offense to make plays. Jake Ferguson comes in as the new starting tight end. So look, with Pollard, Lamb, Cooks, Gallup, Ferguson, and who knows, maybe they bring back Ezekiel Elliott. I know that's been a little conversation, but I think this Cowboys offense is going to be a very good offense, or at least it seems like it. Now, the big question mark and the big reason why I can't say for certain that this offense is going to be one of the best offenses, a top 10, top 5 offense. I think it'll be top 10, but a top 5 offense in the NFL is because Mike McCarthy is calling plays for the first time as the head coach of the Cowboys. And another thing to take a look at, what's going to happen with Zach Martin, the all-pro right guard, one of the best offensive linemen in the game, holding out over a new contract extension. You've heard Jerry Jones say, we just got to move on from it. It is what it is. Them not having him, if he is not there at the start of the season, it is a big loss. And this is an O-line that is already really good with Tyron and Tyler Smith on the left side, Terrence Steele at right tackle. This is a good offensive line. But losing Zach Martin is going to be a big blow, and it could impact the Cowboys' success to start the season until they potentially get a deal done. The defensive side of the ball for the Cowboys, this is their super strength. DeMarcus Lawrence, Jonathan Hankins, Micah Parsons, the best defensive player in football, in my opinion. Leighton Vander Esch, Jabril Cox, Stephon Gilmore, Trayvon Diggs, Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, Jaron Kearse. This is a elite defensive unit that I think has potential and should be a top 5 defense at the end of the season. As I mentioned, I think there's a few weaknesses on this Dallas team. It's going to be Dak Prescott is a potential. Well, their weaknesses last year were Dak Prescott turning the ball over, the wide receiver room, and the running defense. And I don't think their running defense is as big as a deal as the first two, but for success in 2023 for the Cowboys, Dak Prescott cannot turn the ball over 15 times. They need to get production out of the wide receiver room, which I think they will get from Brandon Cooks. Who knows what Michael Gallup is going to do, but I think they'll get production from Brandon Cooks. And then Mike McCarthy needs to be a good play caller. So going through and looking at their schedule for this season, they open up week 1 against the New York Giants. I think they are going to win that game. But I do think week 2, they play the New York Jets. I think they lose. I think they get 2 straight wins in week 3 and week 4 against the Cardinals and the Patriots. They're 3-1. I think they beat the San Francisco 49ers, and they're 4-1. I think they beat the Chargers, go to 5-1. I think they beat the Rams after a week 7 bye. And was that 6-1? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-1. I think they lose week 9 to the Eagles, go to 6-2. I think they beat the Giants 7-2. Carolina 8-2. Washington 9-2. I think they lose to Seattle and fall to 9-3. I think they beat the Philadelphia Eagles and go to 10-3. 10-3. Yeah, and I think they lose the next two. Buffalo, Miami. They're 10-5 or 9-5. I think they end the season 12-5. I need to pull up the other thing so I can go game by game with them. Maybe I should probably share the screen too. It was a very poor episode here or something like that. But I think the Cowboys end the season 12-5. I think this team is going to be one of the best teams in the NFC. I wouldn't be surprised if they win 13, 14 games this season. Look, I think the addition of Stephon Gilmore to strengthen the outside of the secondary is a very good addition. I still think he's one of the premier corners in the NFL. I think the Brandon Cooks addition, I think that is one of the most underrated moves of the offseason. I think this is a really, really good pickup for the Dallas Cowboys. I think it's really going to impact this offense and the success they have this season. And obviously the defense, that defense is going to be amazing in 2023. This Cowboys team, I think they're going to make the postseason 12-5. I don't have them winning the division. We'll get to that in a minute. But this is going to be a very, very good Dallas Cowboys team this season. It just is. I think they have all of the tools to make a run. I think they could potentially, if all goes well, win a Super Bowl this season. I really do. Moving on to the next team is the New York Football Giants. In 2022, they were a 9-7-1 team. They tied with the Washington Commanders last season. They brought in Darren Waller from the Raiders, Deonte Banks, and Jalen Hyatt via the draft. And Paris Campbell came over from Indianapolis. Brian Daboll entering second year as head coach. They extended Daniel Jones this offseason, and they signed Saquon Barkley on a 1-year deal. I see some regression coming in 2023 from this Giants team. First of all, they face the AFC East and the NFC West this season. I think that's the division the NFC East faces this year. They're going to have it tough. They really are. They're playing some really, really good teams this season. And I don't think they improved that much from last season. I really don't. Last season, 16th in points per game, 26th in passing yards. They were 4th in rushing yards. Obviously, they had Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones, who were beasts on the ground last season. They were 27th in rushing yards allowed, 14th in passing yards allowed. They allowed 21.8 points per game, a +3 turnover differential. Look, this team, I think the biggest thing for the Giants in 2023 is going to be this passing game. All right, the receiving room with Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, Jalen Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robertson, Sterling Shepard, Cole Beasley, Jameson Crowder. There's some nice depth pieces there, but I don't think they have a solidified number one receiver, right? Hodgins, Slayton, those guys are good players. I don't see them being a true number one receiver when a team's matching up on the defensive side of the ball saying, we have to guard this guy. He is their big time playmaker outside in the receiving core. How is this passing game going to fare? The Giants have a mid defense, right? An average defense at best. They have some nice pieces. Kayvon Thibodeau is on that defense. He's great. Dexter Lawrence is a pretty good player as well. But how is this defense going to is this defense going to improve? And the Giants, I expect them to play from behind a fair amount this season. And how is this receiving core? How is Daniel Jones going to get this team back in the game via the air? Because I think they're going to be down a fair amount this season. And when you're down, you can't really rely on the run as heavily as you want to. And look, we saw Daniel Jones at times last season be a good passer, but I don't think he's the greatest thrower of the football in the NFL. And I don't think I'm crazy to say that. I said last season, I was saying it all year last year when the Giants were having their success in the regular season. I said they were frauds. I said they wouldn't win a playoff game. They did win a playoff game, and they got stomped by the Eagles. I think this team goes through some severe regression this season. And look, last year, their number one receiver, Darius Slayton, had 724 yards, most by any receiver or tight end on the roster last season. They didn't have a 1,000-yard receiver. I would be surprised if they had one this year based off of they're going to be leaning on the run, and they have the 29th ranked offensive line. So Daniel Jones, when he does decide to throw, doesn't have tons of time to throw. They're going to run the football a lot. Their defense, unless it improves drastically, should be about a mid-defense, below average defense like it was last season. And with the competition and the teams that they're playing this season, I really do think they're going to miss out in the playoffs. I think they're going to be under 500. And let's go through here their schedule. I do think they lose week 1 against the Cowboys at home. I think they win week 2 against the Arizona Cardinals. I think they lose week 3 against the Niners and week 4 against the Seattle Seahawks. I think they lose weeks 5 and 6 against the Dolphins and the Bills. I think they win week 7 against the Washington Commanders. I think they lose week 8 to the Jets, and they win week 9 against the Raiders. They lose week 11 to the Washington Commanders. They win against the Patriots in week 12. They have a week 13 bye. I think they beat the Packers in week 14, lose to the Saints in 15, Eagles in week 16, before beating the Giants. And I do think they beat the Eagles in week 18. I think the Eagles are going to be good enough where they rest their starters final week of the season. Ultimately, I think the Giants go 7-10. Last season, they went 9-7-1. I think this year they fall to 7-10. And I think they miss the postseason. I think this team, look, they're playing some tremendous football teams. The Cowboys and the Eagles are in their own division. Those are two teams I think will be in it at the end of the year. They play the Niners, Dolphins, Bills, Jets, Saints. Those are all going to be teams that are going to be really good teams this upcoming season. And I don't see the Giants getting the job done this season. All right, the Philadelphia Eagles are the next team. I realize I haven't changed what team. It's just said Cowboys the whole time. So, all right, great production right there. The Eagles are the next team. This is a team made it to the Super Bowl, won the NFC, went 14-3 last season. They lost their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator to the Colts and the Cardinals, because both of them becoming head coaches. They had a great draft. They added Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, both Georgia players in the first round. They added Terrell Edmonds, they lost Terrell Edmonds. No, they added Terrell Edmonds, added DeAndre Swift, added Greedy Williams. They lost Miles Sanders, Javon Hargrave, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Marcus Epps, and TJ Edwards. This is the cream of the crop in the NFC. This is the best team in the NFC, not only last season, but I think this season they have the potential to be the best team as well. They were 3rd in total yards per game last season, 5th in rushing yards, 9th in passing yards, and 3rd in points per game. They were 17th in rushing yards allowed, 1st in passing yards allowed, 8th in points per game allowed. They had a +8 turnover differential. They were 1st in sacks, and they have the number 1 ranked offensive line in the NFL. This is an amazing team. It really is. Jalen Hurts, voted by the NFL players as the 3rd best player in the NFL. I think he's a top 10 quarterback. They added DeAndre Swift along with Rashad Penny to go with Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott. This is going to be a premier rushing group as well, with Hurts' ability to run the football, adding DeAndre Swift, who I think will thrive. Behind the best offensive line in football, DeAndre Swift, as long as he's healthy, I think is going to have a bounce back season in 2023. A.J. Brown is one of the best receivers in all of football. Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins rounded out the wide receiver room. Dallas Goedert is an amazing tight end. And then this is such a great offensive line with Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelsey, Cam Jurgens, and Lane Johnson. This is the best offensive line in football, and I don't think it's particularly close. This defense, yes, they lost Javon Hargrave and C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Marcus Epps and T.J. Edwards, but this is still a great defense. I still expect them to finish as a top 5 defense in the NFL. Brandon Graham, Jalen Carter, Fletcher Cox, and Josh Sweat to go with Nicholas Morrow, Kobe Dean, Hassan Reddick, James Bradbury, Nolan Smith, Zach Cunningham, Jordan Davis, Terrell Edmonds, Reed Blankenship, and Darius Slay. Greedy Williams is also in that secondary as well. Coached by Nick Sirianni. I think he's one of the best coaches in the NFL. I think this Eagles team, I don't think they're going to have a Super Bowl hangover. I know they didn't win the Super Bowl, but a lot of teams that end up losing these championship games tend to have a hangover. I don't think they're going to have a hangover. I don't think Jalen Hurts' season was a one-hit wonder. I don't think it was all based off of the players around him last season. I think he truly is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I think this team is going to carry over into next season. And taking a look at their schedule, they're going to be an amazing team. They open up week 1 against the Patriots. That is a win. Week 2 against the Vikings is a win. Week 3 in Tampa is a win. Week 4 against the Commanders is a win. Week 5 against the Rams is a win. They already open up the season 5-0. I do think they lose to the Jets in week 6 before beating the Dolphins and the Commanders in week 7 and 8. I have them beating the Cowboys in week 9. I have them beating the Chiefs in week 11 coming off of a bye. Currently, I have them 10-1 or 9-1 so far. I think they lose to the Bills and the 49ers back-to-back weeks. And then I also think they lose to the Dallas Cowboys, but I think they beat the Seahawks, beat the Giants, and they beat the Arizona Cardinals to end the season. They weren't supposed to lose one of these games. I have them going 13-4. So I don't think they lose to the San Francisco 49ers in week 13. So I have them going 13-4 this season. I have them beating the Patriots in week 1, the Vikings in week 2, the Buccaneers in week 3, Washington in week 4, the Rams in week 5, losing to the Jets in week 6 before being the Dolphins, the Commanders, and the Cowboys, beating the Chiefs, losing to the Bills, beating the Niners, losing to the Cowboys, beating the Seahawks, beating the Giants, beating the Arizona Cardinals, and then I have them losing week 18 to the Giants, although that one could be a win. You never know. I have them going 13-4 on the season, first place in the NFC East. I think this team is going to carry over and be one of the best teams in the league next season. Final team in this division, Washington Commanders. 8-1 last season. They have a new offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, from the Kansas City Chiefs. He came over. He's going to be their OC. This was an interesting move. First of all, just to see him leave the Chiefs and go to the Commanders in the same position. But, he wasn't really in charge of the play calling there in Kansas City. It was Andy Reid's responsibility. He goes to the Washington Commanders, has a chance to call plays. Who knows, potentially gets a chance to become a head coach when and if Ron Rivera ever gets relieved of his duties. And look, there's already buzz about this team. Yesterday, you had Ron Rivera say that players are, surprised by the intensity of Eric Bieniemy, of his practices, of the way he's intense and vocal. to the players. And that made the way that sounded is that these Washington players are soft. Rivera said that's not what he meant to say, saying that's a new, fresh change in the organization. Anyways, they added Emmanuel Forbes, the corner out of Mississippi State, in the first round of the draft. He also added Jacoby Brissett. The biggest question for this team is going to be Sam Howell. I think he's going to be the week 1 starter. Brissett is there in case things go majorly south for this Commanders team with Sam Howell at the helm. And the reason he is a question mark is we have seen him play one NFL game. He threw for 169 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and he completed 57.9% of his passes. So we haven't seen him play football at the NFL level at all. We've seen him play 1 game and a bunch of training camp practices, and that's it. But the rest of this team, I think they have nice pieces. Brian Robinson Jr., Antonio Gibson, that's a nice RB duo. I think they have a very nice trio of receivers, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel. Those guys are very good players as well. They were 3rd in yards allowed per game last season. They had one of the best defenses in the NFL. They were 12th in rushing yards per game, 21st in passing yards, 24th in points per game. They were 4th in passing yards allowed, 11th in rushing yards allowed. This defense, 7th in points allowed. This was a defense for the Commanders last season that was incredible. Chase Young, I know they were looking to shop him. They didn't exercise his 5th-year option. He's been injured a lot through his career, but you never know. He could bounce back and be like Chase Young from his rookie year in his Ohio State days. Darren Payne, Jonathan Allen, Montez Sweat, David Mayo, Kendall Fuller, Emmanuel Forbes. This is a pretty solid defensive unit. And like I said, they have nice offensive pieces. McLaurin had 1,000 yards last season, 5 touchdowns. Dotson had 500 yards, 7 touchdowns. Samuel with 4 touchdowns, 600 yards. Brian Robinson, 797 yards and 2 touchdowns. Gibson with 3 touchdowns, 546 yards last season. Logan Thomas at the tight end position. Their offensive line is ranked 27th, so that is a weakness for them. But going to the schedule, I don't think this team's going to be all that good. I really don't. Right? They have nice pieces. Who knows what Sam Howell is going to be? That's the biggest thing. That's the hardest thing to do with this team is predict them with Sam Howell. Because Sam Howell could light up the NFL next season and they could go on and they could win the division. Or he could stink and they could be one of the worst teams in the league, or he can be just average and they can be the same team as last year. Opening up, they play the Cardinals. I think they win week 1. I think they lose week 2 to the Denver Broncos and week 3 to the Bills. I think they lose week 4 to the Eagles. I think they win week 5 against the Bears, lose against the Falcons in week 6, lose in week 7 and 8 against the Giants and Eagles. I think they win week 9 against the Patriots, lose week 10 against the Seahawks. I think they win week 11 against the Giants, lose against the Cowboys. They lose against the Miami Dolphins. I think they lose against the Rams coming off of a bye. I think the Rams are going to get a few wins this season. I think they lose against the Jets, Niners, and Cowboys to round out the season. And I have them finishing with a record of 4-13 this season, winning 1 divisional game. Look, this team, I just said it. This team has nice talent. They have tons of talent on this team. They really do. They have a good defense. They have a nice receiving trio. I like their running back room. But look, they play some tough opponents, right? I think Denver's going to be improved. They play the Bills. They play the Eagles. I think the Falcons are going to be good. I think the Giants are going to have their number. I have them splitting the season series. I think the Seahawks are going to be great. They play the Dolphins, the Jets, the 49ers, the Cowboys. This is going to be a very tough schedule for this Washington team. And it's really hard to pick them when you have a quarterback as inexperienced and with as little sample size as Sam Howell. But ultimately, though, I think they finish the season 4-13, miss out on the postseason, obviously, and I think they are buying for one of the top quarterbacks in next year's draft. So my NFC East prediction preview is first place Eagles finishing 13-4, the Dallas Cowboys finishing 12-5, the New York Giants finishing 7-10, and the Washington Commanders going 4-13. Next episode, I don't know what division we're going to do. I don't know. We'll just pick a random one for next episode. We're going to try and get that out this week, potentially tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, maybe even Sunday. There's going to be another episode this week. We're 29 days until the start of the NFL season. We've got tons and tons of these predictions and other things to do leading up to the season. So if you like this content, want to see more, like, share, comment, subscribe, follow the other platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. We're going to be active a lot more on there, especially during the NFL season. We'll be back with another episode of The Franchise later this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys later.